Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Exploder. My name's Dan, let's get right into it. In this episode, I want to talk about merchandise. Now I've already covered the WCW What the Hell merchandise, as I've mentioned before. Now I want to get in more of a general sense. The 1990s were a transitional time for professional wrestling. From the campy, later Hogan days of the early 1990s to the dark period between 93 and really 96, 97, and then 97 through 2000, which quite frankly was the golden age, the Attitude Era, and the reason why a bunch of 14-year-olds got in trouble for flipping people off. But now I want to talk about professional wrestling. I want to talk about merchandise of the 1990s and some of the general trends you saw. Things that were a little different. Things that you would see only in the 90s and quite frankly didn't see before and thank God haven't seen since. So in this episode, I want to cover the 1990s merchandise, WWF, WCW, just in a general sense, so you understand exactly what was going on at this time. I want to start the episode with talking about toys that were indicative of the early 90s, something that has actually made a retro comeback recently, and are not weird and not bad. They're actually pretty cool. The old Hasbros from back in the day. WCW had to deal with Galoob, and they were more like LJN figures, only smaller. But the WWF Hasbros weren't exactly accurate, so to speak. They were sort of proportionally messed up, but they were cartoony, and they worked on the level of what the WWF was at the time. Quick giving a shout out to Hasbros, H-A-S Bros, on Facebook. I'm going to put a link down there. It's a group I'm actually a part of. If you like the Hasbros, join up to them and see some of the stuff they have. There are customs, there are just some classic ones, and really great group. Now, on to the merchandise itself. Of course, the WWF back in the day had wrestling buddies. The first thing about those wrestling buddies, and like I said before, WCW had them later on, and they just looked weird. The WWF ones actually were still in that cartoony stage, and they looked and they worked. Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, Jake the Snake Roberts, anyone who felt the need to wrestle a miniature Sergeant Slaughter, they had you covered. So those were always fun. Again, it was just part of it. Again, those would exist later on, but they were really indicative of the early 90s, and that was a perfect time for them because of the market they were going after. Then, of course, you can't talk about merchandise in professional wrestling without talking about how the WWF marketed everything in the early 90s. The WWF at one point marketed every single thing. Of course, now we're remembering them as t-shirts and DVDs and streaming services and all these things. It's more streamlined. This wasn't the case in the early 90s. In the early 90s, the WWF put their name, their logo, whatever, on everything. Because again, they were going for a child market. They were going for the kids who were really at the tail end of Hogan, but they were still shooting for kids. That's why they had stuff like birthday sets, pillowcases, sheets for your bed, ice cream bars, juice drinks, Virgil t-shirts for some reason, table hockey game, pinball tables, pen toppers, book bag, Hulk Hogan dress-like gear, steroids and latent racism not included, flashlight, candy dispensers, thumb wrestlers, an Ultimate Warrior kite, again, I don't know, Hulk Hogan alarm clock, Hulk Hogan bubble bath, Hulk Hogan, let's just say Hulk Hogan plus insert regular item here because that'll save a lot of time. Save Hulk Hogan anything, there was probably something for it at that time. WWF put their name on everything, and that was again sort of a shotgun approach. Fire everything out there and see what sticks. Noticeably, many of these didn't exist after a few years. Even the ice cream bars, which went for a long time, were eventually discontinued. The juice strings, I didn't know existed until I did the research for this. Virgil t-shirts, they were great for dabbing up oil in a garage, but beyond that, not so much. The birthday sets, which included paper plates, napkins, and all those things, again, although there were some later on, they didn't exist for much longer. They were early 90s, and then of course there was the stuff later on where they tried to put pictures on a pizza. That was just weird. But yeah, they marketed everything at some point because they were going for kids, and kids supposedly can convince their parents to buy them anything, and it showed. Then of course we have the staple of professional wrestling, the staple of merchandise. We're talking about t-shirts. In the 1980s, the WWF did a lot of t-shirts. They did t-shirts with logos. Now this was also something you'd see on Saturday Night's Main Event. They would have a drawn logo, a cartoonish type logo. So if it was Macho King Randy Savage versus Brutus Beefcake, you would see like a logo. You didn't see a picture. Like now we're used to these live action graphics and all these things. This wasn't the case back then. So back then you would have the logos. Well, these kind of logos were what you'd see on t-shirts. The 90s went for more realism. So there was that transition to where they were getting out of the cartoony stuff and they started doing pictures. Now that works out. If you're Hulk Hogan or Macho Man Randy Savage or the Ultimate Warrior, you can take a picture of that person and put it on a thing and put a design on a shirt and really sell it. If you have a t-shirt that just says Virgil and it's a picture of Virgil or Sid Justice or I don't know, the Repo Man, it's not going to do much. So it depends on who you put on the shirt and how interesting you make it is really what made it worthwhile. Now we're getting to something that is uniquely the 90s. Oh my god, uniquely the 90s. Jean jackets. I think the WWF in particular had some kind of stock in a denim manufacturing plant at some point in the 90s, because my god, they put denim everything. Bret Hart, The Undertaker. Even as late as 96, 97, they were doing stuff with Shawn Michaels. A full color photo of Shawn Michaels on the back of a jean jacket. Really well done for a jean jacket. They had one with a logo, but they would have ones that were pictures. They had one for WrestleMania 12, where they had some of the main matches on the sleeve, for crying out loud. Full color, logo on the back, the whole thing. WCW did it too, putting WCW Nitro logos on their jackets. Sometimes they would just have a regular like denim shirt, and they would have a WCW logo embroidered on the shoulder or on the lapel. Just stuff like that. I don't know. Again, jean jackets had a very particular part in history, and this decade, this gap, this part of it, and this goes through the Monday Night Wars. This goes through 97, 98, when the WWF actually at one point transitioned to like a black. It was still denim, but they transitioned to like a black denim with the Warzone and the Roy's War. They would have logos like that and things like that, but they were still denim. It was a lot of denim for some reason. There was a military theme in some of the things, but it was a lot of denim, and I just, that's uniquely wrestling in the mid 90s. Felt hats. Yes, those are two words you don't really put together often. Felt hat. Wrestling was alive and well, and everyone who remembers wrestling in the mid to late 90s remember felt hats. The WWF and WCW did them. They were these cheap little felt top hat things that, instead of being the normal red and white like you were Dr. Seuss on crystal meth, they had a wrestling logo on them. What logo? Didn't matter. These hats were like Buff Bagwell in 1998 if he had the budget of Buff Bagwell in 2018. That's pretty much what they were. DX, the NWO, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Goldberg, they all got into the lucrative felt hat market. They were mostly found alongside 8x10 photos of Goldberg and Stone Cold Steve Austin in appropriately carny booths all over America. And yes, I had one. I bought a DX felt hat at the country fair when I was 13, and I was really impressionable, so here's how it goes. I could have been doing crack, but instead, I bought a DX felt hat, and I'm almost as embarrassed of the last one as I was the first one. Then, of course, there was foam everything. If you think felt hats were bad, let's talk about felt. The foam. My mistake. Gonna keep it. Foam. Remember foam fingers back in the 80s? I mean, every sporting event has some kind of version of that. I know the Cleveland Indians have like or those the Braves. It doesn't matter. Some racist team. They have a tomahawk. That's part of the gimmick. But most of the time, it's a finger. It's a #1 whole thing. Hulk Hogan had. When it's the Hulk Hogan #1 finger, it makes sense. You know, like I said, they put his name and image on everything. So if you do that, you can do whatever you want. And Hogan was selling every single thing. Hogan at one point, and I'm not joking here, sold Hulk Hogan bubble bath. Just gonna put that out there. I assume it smells like spray tan and future divorce. I don't know. But anyway, while a Hulk Hogan #1 foam finger makes perfect sense, the WWF and to a lesser extent WCW didn't stop there. What used to be a simple foam accessory for your foam needing needs went to foam cowboy hats for the smoking guns. That was a real thing. A foam Brahma bull tattoo for The Rock. A foam skeleton middle finger for Stone Cold Steve Austin, which looked like the Crypt Keeper hated you. WCW even had Macho Man Randy Savage, his giant cowboy hat thing, which, by the way, was pretty, large and impressive anyway. They built a really, really large one out of foam and sold it. So WCW, they knew how to get into the foam game. God, they knew. Then there was the foam tombstone and urn for The Undertaker, which brings me to my next topic, The Undertaker. Now, this is not merchandise himself. He's a great performer, legendary, absolute. But I've mentioned this before in an article I've written prior, when this was just simply a blog. I had it right the first time. I've never seen a character more protected and hoard out as The Undertaker was in the WWF in the early to mid 90s. He was a guy whose gimmick was protected to an nth degree, and rightfully so, to the point where he didn't interact with the public. He was The Undertaker. Whenever the camera was turned on, you saw The Undertaker. And then they'd have him do weird things like he would sing Happy Birthday on part of a ill-fated Happy Birthday message line, whatever the hell that was. He appeared in the WWF merchandise catalog wearing his own shirt, because that's terrifying, and they even had an Undertaker teddy bear. I know, this wasn't one I mentioned before a couple shows ago where it was like a regular teddy bear and they just had the name on it embroidered. No. This was a bear that looked like The Undertaker. It was dressed like him down to the tie, because nothing screams terrifying like a teddy bear dressed up like an Undertaker. So this is the guy who they keep the gimmick and then they just completely destroy it with stuff like this. Now, granted, they made money, and they made money with t-shirts that had him on it. They made denim jackets that someone bought, I'm sure. The Undertaker was a merchandise thing, and it was great, but I just don't understand. Sometimes they would do stuff that just seemed uncharacteristic for the gimmick, but it made them money. I don't understand the point of having The Undertaker sing happy birthday to, I don't know, insert name here, Gary, whatever the hell. I didn't see the point in that, but it's something they did, so I don't know. Like I said, the 1990s were a transitional time for professional wrestling, something that started in the early 90s with the waning days of Hulkamania and cartoony, and ended with Stone Cold Steve Austin flipping off his boss after dumping concrete into his Corvette. It was a huge transitional time both for mainstream and independent wrestling. Merchandise was, at the beginning, sort of a shotgun blast. You would throw everything at the wall, see what hits, and an occasional t-shirt might sell, or a book bag, or what have you. At the same time, by the end of the 90s, it became more focused. While there were the weird merchandise, like I've mentioned WCW, and trust me, WWF fans, there is merchandise in the future. There is a version of What the Hell that's coming for the WWF, because they had their fair share of what were they thinking type merchandise. And while there's always going to be that, there's always going to be some kind of cologne or some kind of weird thing they throw at you that makes no sense, they thought, we can make a buck on it. By the end of the 90s, going into 2000, it was highly focused, and that was the transition that happened in wrestling, and where t-shirts now again are relying on more logos, although there are some pictures, but they're relying more on logos and designs, and really high-end designs. You still saw in the 90s sort of that transition from cartoon to realistic, and now we're just seeing the tail end of that. Now, what's going to happen in the future? I have no idea. There might be a whole new concept as far as merchandise goes. It might become more streamlined. It might go back to the shotgun blast. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But all in all, it's part of wrestling, and that's what I like about it. I like wrestling to be unpredictable, and I like the fact that there's so many options, even though some of these options were bizarrely insane. It was good as a fan to have those. If you wanted an 8x10 of Hollywood Hogan, you could. If you wanted for some reason, a felt hat of the Wolfpack, you could. If you wanted a book bag with the Ultimate Warrior's face on it, first, you got problems. Second of all, hey, go for it. That's the beauty of it. But all in all, merchandise is what it is. It's there to make money. And some people look back on these things with pride. And they remember these things. Like, I regret buying the DX hat, but you know what? I remember where I was when I did. It's not necessarily about that. It's about the nostalgia of remembering where you were. So in that regard, yeah, makes sense. Well, that's going to do it for this time. If you have any ideas, questions, anything, death threats, whatever you need to do, like I'm important enough for death threats, whatever, send them to me, ExploderPod on Twitter, comment below the video, I don't know, get a hold of Frank, I don't know, do what you gotta do, get a hold of me. If you have any ideas, suggestions, tell me you hate me, I don't care. Just start the conversation, continue the conversation, and I might bring it up on a future episode. Until next time, my name's Dan, this is Exploder, have a good one.